Hey, I'm Lewis, the lead developer of Brawlers of Duality, and I'm currently adding the roguelike mode to my game. I want a mode where people can play alone or with a friend and not have to compete against each other. And I started making this mode by starting with a design document. In this design document, we go over a bunch of stuff like why I'm making the mode, how players will play it, and what I'm trying to get players to feel while playing it. So, we have a high concept where I'm building out a co-op mode inspired by Hades and Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 2, and also Melee's Adventure mode. So with that, I'm using Hades style, where you have rooms of enemies that you have to clear, and then you get a power-up at the end of a room and become stronger throughout the run. And for my game, I want you to explore the fantasy side of the lore, the sci-fi, and then like the steampunk, but magic, I call it aetherpunk. And then also a fourth area where it's all space styled and celestial, where you fight the final boss and you'll continue your run if you want to do an endless run. In this mode, you also have boss fights and unique enemies to fight against that aren't all just playable characters. And then we have the mission statement, which is what I stated earlier, where I wanted a mode where you don't have to compete with your friends and you can just play by yourself or with your friend and just beat up on some NPCs. I'll skip over some of this other stuff, but you can pause the video and read if you want. The next thing I want to go over is the item system. So this is now the third iteration of the item system I'm working on. Initially, the item system was just stats, so it would be like your attack damage, how much an item would heal you for, your speed, your dash speed, and how much knockback you did. But I wanted to change that, and my first iteration kind of forced you into using certain moves, but I was playing with that in my head, and it didn't seem as fun. So it would be like, oh, you do heavy attacks if you get these items, you do light attacks if you get these items, but didn't seem fun. So now we're on the third iteration that was more inspired by Hades. I was watching this video on roguelike design, and specifically Hades and Balatro, where you want to kind of have the players build an engine where a lot of things work together. So for me, I wanted to build out a way where certain playstyles were encouraged. So I have the aggro playstyles, which are high attack damage and high knockback. And then I have a more safe room clear control style where you want to do damage over time, heal, take less damage, and use projectiles. And then I have some other types of things I wanted to add to either be supplemental to those or add more of a mid-range playstyle. So we got like aggro loss, backstabbing, using parries a lot, having your size change, that's just for fun. And then also high mobility, where high mobility can work either in aggro or control, where in aggro it lets you dash between enemies and beat them up fast, and then in control, it lets you avoid attacks more easily. So I'll scroll through the items and you can read them if you'd like. And then we have the level design. I'm really inspired by Hades because I feel like a lot of those levels would work well in mine. So that's the goal. And then also through these level designs, I also want to show off the lore I have. So I'll show off major cities from each area. So we'll have a Aetherpunk, a fantasy city, a sci-fi city, and then the celestial. And then for the plot, we have you're a group of mercenaries trying to fight back against a corrupting god that is trying to take over the globe. Your goal is to defeat these machines and people to free them from the grasp of the third god, and eventually get to the third god and defeat him. So the minimum viable product would be the three biomes that you play through, and then have a final boss with no story involved, just all gameplay. And with that, I'm also trying to figure out if I want like more of a Smash Brothers Melee adventure mode where I vary up the types of combat you do and have like some exploration stages, or if I want it to be more Hades where it's all pure combat. but I'll figure that out as I go and do some playtesting. And then for a proof of concept, I have finished that, where I have rooms that just connect to each other over and over and spawn an item when you defeat an enemy, and I'll show that off in a second. And then for the wish list, I want to add in story content, add more replayability and progression, kind of inspired by Vampire Survivors, so maybe it's how you'll unlock more playable characters. I also want to add more NPCs through this mode and more stages and a bunch of other stuff that will help the development of not just this mode, but the Battle Royale mode and even the 1v1 and 2v2 modes. So now let's jump into Unreal Engine to see my progress on this mode. So I started by just building out a persistent level that handles the shading and some other small things like the platform you spawn on. And then I added a start room that just has these 2 doors and a floor. And then these 2 combat rooms that spawn enemies and have an area for you to hit enemies into to defeat them, or you can just hit them off the stage and they'll die. So let's play the game a little bit so I can show you what I've done. Currently the game works in multiplayer, and my goal is to keep it that way. And then as you defeat an enemy, they drop a piece of loot. And then I got a common, so it's just a knife that increases my backstab damage. And currently, I don't have all of these new weapon enhancements working in game, so I won't actually do extra backstab damage. Then you go through the door after you defeat an enemy, and you go to the next scenario. And then the doors don't work until you defeat all the enemies. And that's it so far. So now I'll get into the weeds of how this mode works. So we have this door that then tells the game mode, hey, the next room is going to give us this reward. And then it sets it. And then every time you walk into a door, we set up a new set of doors and what they'll give you, and then teleport the player to the starting location and set up the loot and that type of stuff, and spawn the enemies, and then do some debugging text. And then over here in the game mode, we're using the base game mode that I've built out, but using a child of it to have this loot system where we roll the rarity and then initialize the loot. And then when you clear a room, we call this spawn loot function, where it'll determine what type of loot based on the room you're in, and then spawn the loot. And that's about it for now. Hopefully I will have this new game mode, the proof of concept of it, up on the live version of the game by end of the week. I want to get the item system reworked before I do that. And hopefully you play it. It'll be available in the demo, and hope to see you in the next video. Oh, also, if you want to see more in-depth stuff, I'm going to start doing daily stand-ups where I go over everything I did each day, and I'll show off a lot more code, especially C++ code there.